The first thing I'd like to ask you about, given the tremendous news, is obviously the relationship between RTL and Spot Exchange, a tremendous broadcaster. Spot Exchange, a phenomenal company that's been built out of the digital video space. Could you give us an understanding of what that merger means for the industry, and what do you see as coming out of that merger?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so we all live in the bubble and we live and breathe the day to day, right? So, I mean, I love programmatic, you love programmatic, we all love programmatic, but guess what? I mean, this is a huge validation for the space that a company like RTL is investing in the technology that we see changing the way that media is bought and sold every day. So, I mean, we're very excited about what it'll do for Spot Exchange in terms of establishing a European footprint, access to whole new classes of assets we've never had access to before with the Fremantle content business and broadcast properties. And then from RTL's perspective, really being able to plug into a platform that's built from the ground up with a programmatic infrastructure, we believe will add a lot of value for their business as well.
So from RTL or any publisher broadcaster perspective, how do they define programmatic? What does it mean to them, if you could help us understand it? Because that word is used and some people have different definitions.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, so to me, and I think that this is held by others within our organization, programmatic's all about automation, right? Okay. So historically, RTB really popularized the method of the automation of price discovery, right? So what is the value of this media asset? Well, let's execute an auction. Let's show a bunch of data to the buy side. Let's enable them to bring their own data to the table. Let's look at what kind of competitive pressures there are for this single impression opportunity, and let's let the market decide how much this impression's worth. But what we've seen is that is a little bit challenging to forecast against, to plan against for traditionally sourced buys. I mean, like I added up some numbers from eMarketer and Forrester. By my estimate, 9% of all media is transacted in a spot market, in a one-to-one impression transaction. The rest of it is direct. So, we've got all these great tenets of transparency from programmatic, better control, better insights, but we're only touching less than a tenth of the total pie, right? So how are we going to get into the rest of the media pie and have an impact there? I think that's where programmatic applied to more traditionally reserved will bring a lot of benefit. But if we just think of programmatic as RTB, we'll never be backed into a quarter really quickly. We won't be able to do much.
So from the view, and I've heard this from publishers, it's just a comment. I've heard the word RTB from large premium publishers, not RTL, but like an RTL.
Sure.
Means race to the bottom.
Yeah.
Right? Could you give any comments on how you view that, how major publishers view RTB like an RTL? Obviously, I'm not asking about RTL, but the broad class of broadcasters, how do they view RTB versus programmatic? And is RTB something they're going to participate in? Or to your point, is it really the other 91% that they care about?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, we work with a lot of premium publishers, of course, not just RTL Group, and we do see CPMs appreciate by using an auction-based model. However, I think if you think about it conceptually, I can certainly appreciate the point of view and the perspective that if I have a commodity and there is so much demand for that commodity that I can sell it on a reserve basis, why should I put it into an open market to be blended in with a whole lot of inventory where it might be commoditized, where what made that inventory special is no longer observed? Why should I turn over the control over how I've packaged that ad product to an intermediary that may or may not represent my ad placement as well as I could do it on my own? So, I mean, I think that's the reason why in video we've seen only a portion of the total supply being transacted in RTB-based environments, right? So, going back to the whole distinction.
Control, that was the big issue.
Yes, I mean, use the infrastructure to sell the media, but it's not using an open auction methodology, right? So that sellers can still have a direct relationship with the buyers, but they leverage all the technology, they leverage the SaaS solutions, they leverage all the great tools that we built as an industry, but they can maintain clearance in a model that's been established for a long time and has been proven valuable time and time again.
So premium publishers, while getting value out of RTB the way you described by raising CPMs, their greatest interest might arguably be when they have premium content that is differentiated in the reserved marketplace, where they can use efficiencies and automation in order to make the current direct relationship much more efficient. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's right. And and there's another element to it as well in terms of layering on top audience with the context, right? So, there's so much invested in creating premium content, right. And it's really, really exciting to see companies like AOL and Yahoo, Netflix invest in online-only content that's only being distributed in online channels, and consumers are loving it, right? They're consuming that left and right. But what about the individual behind the browser, right? So every single content owner knows the type of audience it's going to attract, but there's going to be outliers. There's going to be people that don't fit within the general demographic buckets, and I believe that content owners can realize incremental value from the sale of their inventory if they enable their buyers to be able to cherry pick out those audiences and message to them accordingly. Now, it's really tough, arguably impossible to do that through a traditional ad server to ad server technology stack, and that's why you've seen, obviously companies like Videology and Spot Exchange, create these technology platforms to enable new types of executions, which are getting traction in the market like we've never even seen before. You live in the same world that we do, and it's very exciting to see it go up into the right, and of course it's only a reflection of the success of our partners.
It's a great point. All right, one really hard question for the industry.
Oh yeah,
if that's
good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
No hard questions. I thought it was just going to be easy questions.
Here's the question. If you look at what happened in the print business, print had great titles, publishers, and then the display advertising industry, the digital equivalent of print occurred, and inventory was constrained. Then all of a sudden you had something called social evolve. And with social came the proliferation of a tremendous amount of ad impressions. And those same print publishers and traditional publishers were no longer scarce media owners. They were in a sea of impressions that was arguably dominated by social media.
Yeah.
What is the risk to the traditional broadcaster going forward from the new entrants in our digital ecosystem? And will their situation be similar or different than the one faced in the TV space by the print traditional magazines that existed before them?
So it all comes down to device fragment or audience fragmentation, right? So in the print business, the audience that they used to sell to became disaggregated along a lot of other distribution outlets. We're seeing the exact same thing happen in video, and that's why companies like ABC Disney bought Maker, right? And that was a really amazing validation for the long tail content producer, and that we're moving to a world where you don't need to be like a huge content owner to create assets that garner audiences, right? So I think broadcasters will invest in creating content that tailors to those audiences, or they may acquire companies that already do it very successfully, and then they'll integrate that to their broader sales orgs, right? So at the end of the day, you can't fight consumer behavior.
Nice.
It's kind of like the tide will rise, and it creates a very ripe ground for innovation. So as markets change, as needs shift, I think the very savvy broadcasters will recognize this shift in the content business, and they will lean into it, and they will realize a lot of value for those that move quickly enough.
Do broadcasters view YouTube and Facebook and their entrance, I should say Google with YouTube and Facebook
Sure.
with its video offering, as positive for the ecosystem or challenges to them in their business model, traditional broadcasters?
Yes, for the traditional model, it's going to create some challenges, right? But, going back to the fact that it's the reality of how content is consumed, it depends on the market, but it's going to come. So I think that the degree to which traditional broadcast companies can embrace new media, and also the methods by which advertising is transacted in those mediums, so programmatic technologies, is going to be a very strong indicator of long-term success of those companies. And I really applaud RTL because of course they've recognized this shift, and I think that's a big reason why they may have chosen to work with a company like ours.